What would you do when your perfect world trembles with just one dance? Step into the journey of Michael, a father who controls everything, and Johnson, a boy who finds his wings in every step. One stage, one competition, and a secret from the past that could change it all. Don't look away, for this tale isn't just about winning, it's about hearts learning to soar, even when their feet falter. Michael Benjamin Johnson, a man forged from steel and ambition, moved through the vast hallways of his luxurious estate like a general inspecting a battlefield already destined for victory. Everything in his life was under his iron grip, his daily schedule was meticulously planned like a Mozart symphony, his business empire rose to the pinnacle like the untouchable Everest, and his home operated with the precision of an expensive Swiss machine. No speck of dust dared to stray, no sound dared to break the perfection. Michael's life was a grand oil painting, drawn with rigid strokes, leaving no room for unexpected splashes of color or spontaneous brushwork. So when he strolled past the massive glass windows overlooking the lush green garden, the sight that met his eyes struck like a bolt of lightning across a clear sky, making his usually steady feet falter and his dry heart suddenly pound wildly, as if it wanted to burst free from his chest. There, on the velvety green lawn, his 12-year-old son, little Johnson, was dancing. But no, he was not alone. Alongside him was Amelia, the household cook, a figure Michael had never spared a single thought for since she arrived 6 months ago, clad in a spotless white apron, her hands deftly maneuvering around steaming pots. The sight was too bizarre, too absurd, forcing Michael to blink repeatedly, wondering if the midday sun was playing tricks on his eyes. But no, they were still there, gliding across the grass like two performers in a peculiar ballet he had never been invited to watch. Johnson's steps were clumsy, hesitant, like a newborn fawn learning to stand, but in his eyes shone an intense focus, entirely unlike his usual quiet, weary demeanor. He stumbled, wavered, but instead of frowning or sighing in frustration, he laughed, a pure, carefree laughter, ringing through the garden like bells echoing in a silent valley. Michael froze. How long had it been since he last heard that sound? Ever since his beloved wife passed away, Johnson had withdrawn into his own shell of solitude, and Michael, the powerful father, had unknowingly built an invisible wall between them, filled with unspoken words. And then his gaze shifted to Amelia. The woman moved with an uncanny grace, each step a stroke of perfection, each motion a rhythm full of soul, not like a clumsy cook wielding a ladle, but like a dancer trained in the art of fluidity. She wasn't just playing with the boy, she was leading him, teaching him with a patience and expertise Michael had never expected. A chilling sensation ran down his spine, spreading through his chest like a winter wind sweeping across an empty field. He didn't like this. Not one bit. The thought that someone else, worse yet, a mere household staff, could reach his son's heart, accomplishing what he had failed to do for years, cracked his pride like shattered glass. The more he observed, the more an unfamiliar frustration flared within him. Stiff as a Roman statue, he stepped outside, his polished leather shoes striking the gravel path with dry, resolute sounds, like war drums signaling an impending battle. As he neared, Johnson immediately stiffened, the radiant smile on his face vanishing as quickly as sunlight swallowed by dark clouds. His eyes dropped to the ground in worry. But Amelia did not flinch. She calmly wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron, straightened her posture, and met Michael's gaze without a flicker of hesitation. "What is going on here?" His voice was cold, sharp as a freshly honed blade. Johnson shrank back, his small feet shifting in the grass as if searching for a hole to disappear into. But Amelia, with astonishing composure, replied, "We are practicing, sir. Simply practicing what the young master wants to learn, how to dance." Her tone was even, gentle, yet carried a strange force, like a deep river appearing calm on the surface but concealing powerful undercurrents beneath. Michael turned to Johnson, his brows knitting together like mountains colliding. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was firm, but inside, an unfamiliar pang of guilt stirred. Johnson shrugged, his small shoulders trembling slightly, but before he could speak, Amelia interjected, because he had no one to practice with, sir. Her words were like a velvet-covered arrow, soft yet piercing straight into Michael's chest, forcing him to narrow his eyes at her, searching for a flaw in her unshakable confidence. "This is none of your business," he declared, his tone as hard as granite. Amelia nodded, arms crossed, her expression unreadably serene. "That's true. But you asked, and I answered. As for the real reason, the young master asked me." Michael turned back to his son, his gaze drilling into the boy's delicate face. "Is that true, Johnson?" The boy nodded, slowly, heavily, as if that nod carried the weight of a burden too large for his small frame. A thick silence fell over them, heavy like the sky before a storm. Michael took a deep breath, struggling to suppress the fire of frustration clawing inside him. He had no rational reason to be angry, yet everything about this, the way Amelia stood her ground, the way Johnson looked at him with both fear and pleading, made him feel like he was standing on thin ice, with an abyss lurking below. There was something he was missing, a hidden truth beneath the surface that he couldn't grasp, and that was unacceptable to Michael Benjamin Johnson. "We need to talk," he finally said, his voice dropping like distant thunder. Johnson looked up, worry creasing his young face as his eyes darted between his father and the cook. But Amelia only nodded, light as a passing breeze, and replied, "As you wish, sir." Michael turned sharply, striding back toward the house, his shoulders rigid as if bearing the weight of an entire world. He didn't look back, but in his mind, questions swirled like a storm. Who was Amelia? Why did she have this influence over his son? And more importantly, what had he overlooked in his own home, a place he thought he controlled completely? The truth, like a pearl hidden within a shell, awaited him. And when it finally emerged, it would not just shock him, it would shake the very foundation of Michael Benjamin Johnson's perfectly crafted world. Michael Benjamin Johnson stepped inside, his footsteps heavy as if carrying the weight of an entire sky filled with doubt. He glanced over his shoulder, his gaze sharp as a freshly honed blade, only to see little Johnson leaning toward Amelia, whispering something in a voice as soft as the wind brushing through leaves. Amelia responded quietly, her face an indecipherable canvas, no lines, no flicker of emotion betraying any secrets. Yet, Johnson wore a mysterious, almost imperceptible smile, one reminiscent of the Cheshire Cat from old tales, sending an icy chill down Michael's spine, cold as river water in the dead of winter. There was something more here, a thick fog obscuring the truth, one that even his intelligence and power had yet to pierce. Determination flared within him like fire catching on to dry wood. He would find out, even if it meant turning the world upside down. In the vast office, Michael sat upon his throne, an opulent leather chair, his hands steepled beneath his chin like a philosopher contemplating the universe's mysteries. His gaze was locked onto the computer screen, where Amelia's information appeared as dry and lifeless as an end-of-year financial report. 29 years old, estate chef for 6 months, no criminal record, no trouble, nothing remarkable. A profile so spotless it was almost dull, like a blank sheet of paper untouched by ink. By all accounts, she was nothing more than a quiet shadow in the kitchen, working, serving, and then fading into the background. But Michael was not one to be deceived by appearances. His instincts, the very ones that had led him to build an empire from the ashes of suspicion, were screaming like a factory siren. Amelia was not just a woman wielding a ladle, she was a puzzle, a riddle he had yet to solve. With deft fingers, he typed her name into the search bar, adding a keyword that had haunted him like a specter since that fateful afternoon, Amelia ballet dancer. At first, the screen yielded nothing but meaningless results, ads for dance shoes, articles on children's ballet classes, nothing more than digital debris adrift in an endless sea. But then, like a buried gem beneath the sand, an old article from 7 years ago surfaced. Michael leaned forward, his eyes scanning the headline like a predator locking onto its prey. Young ballet prodigy vanishes from the stage without explanation. His heart pounded, faster than war drums before battle. He clicked the link, and as the website loaded at a sluggish pace, an image emerged, a window into the past, Amelia, younger, radiant in a pristine white ballet costume, standing on a grand stage, arms lifted in perfect form. Her face exuded serenity, confidence, as if she were a muse singing a hymn of wind and light, nothing like the quiet woman stirring soup in his kitchen. The article spoke of a rising star, a dancer of rare talent who had captivated audiences in the most prestigious theaters. She had been on the brink of a legendary career, lauded as the white swan among a flock of ordinary birds, and then, like lightning swallowed by the night, she disappeared. No scandal, no controversy, no explanation. Only silence, mysterious as a velvet curtain falling after the final act. Michael sank back into his chair, his breath heavy as though he had sprinted across an open field. Why would someone like her abandon the limelight to hide in his kitchen? And how had she ended up here, on his estate, like a wildflower blooming in the middle of a desert? Questions piled in his mind like towering structures with no roof, and he knew that this cold, lifeless screen would not provide him with answers. He needed the truth from her own lips. Rising abruptly, his chair groaned in protest as he stormed out of the office, striding toward the kitchen with the force of a general marching into battle. Amelia was there, just as he had anticipated, wiping down the counter with slow, deliberate care, as if every stain was a note in a symphony only she could hear. She looked up as he entered, her eyes glinting with quiet wariness, but her face remained composed, smooth as an undisturbed lake. "Senor Michael," she greeted, her voice soft, wiping her hands on a white towel smudged with a hint of oil. "Is there something you need?" Michael wasted no time. He pulled his phone from his pocket, slamming it onto the counter like a chess piece delivering checkmate. The screen lit up with the article detailing her illustrious past. "Explain this," he said, his voice low but sharp as a blade. For the first time since he met her, he saw a flicker of surprise flash across Amelia's face, swift as a swallow darting across the sky, but enough for him to catch it. She didn't answer immediately, only stared at the screen before lifting her gaze to meet his. "You searched for me," she stated, her voice calm but laced with a delicate layer of ice, as though every word was chosen with surgical precision. Michael crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing as if trying to bore through the wall of secrecy. "I don't like mysteries in my own house," he declared, his voice echoing like thunder rolling through a valley. Amelia exhaled slowly, placing the towel on the counter with a motion as light as a petal falling to the ground. For a moment, he thought she would remain silent, evade him like a fox vanishing into the forest. But then, after a pause that stretched as long as a century, she spoke, her voice gentle yet steady, like a stream flowing over stone. "I am not hiding from my past, senor. I simply chose a different stage, smaller, quieter. But if you wish to know, I will tell you." Michael stood there, unmoving, his heart pounding as if it sought to break free from his chest. Amelia's mystery was not just the story of a lost dancer, it was the key to a door he had never dared to open. A door that led to her connection with Johnson, and to the missing pieces of his own life he had willfully ignored. The truth, like a lighthouse in the dark, was waiting for him to step forward. "I suppose I should have foreseen this," Amelia murmured, her voice as light as rustling leaves in the twilight breeze, yet carrying the resignation of someone long accustomed to wary gazes. Michael did not respond. He merely stood there, his eyes as sharp as a waiting blade, letting her confront the ghost of her past on the phone screen. Her fingers traced the edge of the counter, a delicate motion, as if caressing an old keepsake. "I used to be a dancer," she admitted, her voice soft but clear, like a distant bell tolling from an ancient tower. "Not just a dancer," Michael corrected, his voice low and rumbling like thunder on the horizon. "A star." A bitter smile flickered across her lips, fragile as a withered petal in the wind, yet enough to reveal a crack in the fortress she had built around herself. "A star that burned out before it could truly shine," she said, her tone tinged with sorrow, like a slow melody echoing through an empty theater. Michael studied her, carefully, like an archaeologist examining the fragments of a lost relic. "Why did you leave it?" he asked. His voice was not an invitation, but a quiet, inescapable command. Amelia hesitated, her eyes shimmering with an internal battle, like a still lake disturbed by a single pebble. At last, she exhaled, the sound escaping her lips like a caged bird finally finding freedom. "Because I lost everything," she said, her voice now quieter, more vulnerable, like a dry leaf drifting in the cold autumn air. Michael did not press. He only waited, allowing the weight of her words to settle between them. "When I was 22, dance was my entire world," she continued, her gaze distant, as if staring into a painting of the past. "It was all I knew, all I loved. I trained relentlessly, pushing myself beyond every limit, because I believed I was meant for something great, a flame no one could extinguish." She paused, inhaling deeply as if trying to hold on to a memory slipping through her grasp. Then she added, "And I wasn't alone." Michael's brow furrowed, his eyebrows drawing together like storm clouds colliding. "Who?" he asked, though a part of him already knew the answer. "My fiancé," she whispered, as if afraid the name itself might shatter the fragile space between them. "Adrian. He was a dancer too. We grew up together, trained together, from the days when our bare feet stumbled on scratched wooden floors. We dreamed of conquering the world together, two swans soaring across the sky of art. We were invited on an international tour, a dream we had poured sweat and tears into making real." Her voice trembled, like a harp string plucked by an unseen hand, and Michael felt his stomach tighten, sensing the tragedy about to unfold. "The day before our biggest performance," she continued, her eyes clouding over like mist rolling in over a valley, "Adrian was hit by a car. He died instantly." The words fell between them, heavy as a boulder tumbling from a cliff, dragging silence in its wake. Michael did not move, but he felt the sharp sting of grief, a pain he had never known before, pressing down on him with an unbearable weight. "After that, I couldn't dance anymore," she said, her voice breaking like glass shattering on stone. "I couldn't even listen to music without feeling like a part of my soul was being torn apart. Everything I had built, my dream, my identity, my entire life, vanished like smoke in the wind. So, I disappeared." Michael let her words seep into him, slowly, like rain soaking into parched earth. He had expected a tragic story, but not this, not a pain so raw, so sharp, that it had extinguished the brilliance of a rising star. "So, you became a chef?" he asked, not mocking, but as someone trying to piece together the fragments of her life. Amelia let out a dry laugh, brittle as fallen leaves crushed beneath a careless step. There was no humor in it. "I needed something far from dance, a safe, practical place where I could disappear without being found. Fire in the kitchen replaced the fire in my heart, I suppose." She lifted her gaze, locking eyes with him, her expression still a closed book he had yet to decipher. "And now, I teach your son," she said. Her words were a stone cast into the still waters of Michael's mind, sending ripples outward. He stiffened, not because she was provoking him, but because the truth of it struck a nerve. She had walked away from the stage, but for some reason, she had chosen Johnson, his quiet, withdrawn son, to share whatever light remained within her. "Why?" he asked slowly, his voice deep as waves crashing against a rocky shore. "Why break your own rules for him?" Amelia hesitated, her lips pressing together as if weighing the risk of letting him into the most guarded corner of her soul. Then she spoke, her voice gentle as moonlight spilling over an empty field. "Because he reminds me of myself at that age." Michael went rigid, the revelation hitting him like a slap. Amelia continued, her gaze softening like a breeze stirring the branches of a bare tree. "Because he doesn't smile, Michael. Not really, not since his mother left. I see him, a boy with eyes as sad as a winter sky, and I can't turn away." Her words struck him in the chest, a direct blow, fierce and unyielding. He clenched his jaw, forcing back the tide of emotions rising within him. Johnson had withdrawn into himself ever since the day his mother walked out, retreating into books and quiet habits, a ghost of a child within the walls of their home. Michael had always believed that providing stability, a strong house, a life without want, was enough. But Amelia, this woman with a broken past, had seen what he had failed to see. "He smiles when he dances," she added, her voice warm as a fire in the cold. "And I think, maybe, he just needs someone to listen. Someone to give him a chance to feel joy again." Michael swallowed hard, turning his face slightly to hide the emotion creeping into his eyes. He had spent years building walls around Johnson, believing it was protection, but now, he realized those walls had become a prison, locking away his son's happiness. "And what do you intend to do?" he asked, his voice rough as wind whistling through an old door. "Teach him to dance as if that will fix everything?" Amelia tilted her head, a small, knowing smile flickering across her lips like sunlight breaking through leaves. "No," she said. "I just want him to feel something, anything, again. The rest is up to him. And maybe, up to you too." Michael stood there, motionless, letting her words sink deep into the marrow of his being. He had prided himself on controlling everything in this house, from the plates on the dinner table to the empire he had built. But now, he realized that the most important thing, the happiness of his son, had slipped through his fingers like fine sand. "I don't like outsiders interfering in my family," he said at last, his voice quieter than usual, almost a whisper in the wind. Amelia didn't waver. Her eyes shone with a quiet defiance, gentle but unwavering. "And I don't like seeing children forget how to be children," she replied, her voice steady as roots gripping the earth. Silence wrapped around them, thick as morning mist. But this time, Michael didn't argue. Because deep down, he knew she was right. And for the first time in years, he felt the sharp ache of having been wrong, painful, yet full of hope. Johnson stood before his father in the grand dining room, his small hands clenched into determined fists, as if they were tiny mountains resisting an impending storm. The warm glow of the magnificent chandelier above bathed the polished oak table in golden light, yet the air in the room was taut, stretched like a string on the verge of snapping. Michael Benjamin Johnson, the sovereign of the family empire, sat at the head of the table, his face an enigmatic canvas, unreadable and still. His sharp eyes, as keen as blades, scrutinized his son, who shifted his weight from foot to foot like a fledgling bird preparing for its first flight. At last, Johnson took a deep breath, as if gathering every ounce of courage from the deepest corners of his soul, and spoke, "I want to compete in a dance competition." The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive, thick as the sky before a storm, so dense that even the sound of a pin drop would have been deafening. Michael slowly set down his silverware, every movement measured, calculated, as if drawn with a ruler. His gaze remained locked on his son's youthful face. "A dance competition," he repeated, his voice deep, like an echo resonating from the depths of a cavern, tasting each word as though testing its very existence. Johnson nodded, his small feet planting themselves more firmly on the ground than ever before. "Yes, I want to compete." Michael exhaled, leaning back in his luxurious leather chair, arms crossing over his chest like a general contemplating his next strategy. "And when did you decide this?" he asked, his tone both curious and skeptical. Johnson hesitated for only a second, like a fawn pausing before stepping into a stream. "Some time ago. I've been training with Amelia, and she thinks I'm ready." Something flickered in Michael's eyes at the mention of her name, Amelia, a discordant note in the otherwise perfectly orchestrated symphony of his world. He tilted his head slightly, studying his son with an expression as deep as the ocean, and for the first time in years, he saw a fire burning in those young eyes, not the fleeting excitement of a child but a fierce, unwavering determination, steady as a lighthouse against the crashing waves. Yet that fire did little to quell the storm rising in Michael's chest. This was not a child's game of clumsy steps on a sunlit lawn, it was an arena, a battlefield where discipline, pressure, and expectations loomed like wolves prowling in the dark. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked, his voice low, like waves breaking against a rocky shore. Johnson straightened his back, his thin shoulders now carrying an unexpected strength. I do. And I'm ready. Michael studied his son for a long moment, his gaze piercing through the boy's exterior, searching for truth. Finally, he exhaled, a sound like wind escaping from a door that had been locked for too long. Fine. But if you're going to do this, you do it properly. No half measures. No backing down. You commit. Johnson's face lit up like the sun emerging after a storm, his grin wide and unguarded, so sincere that for a brief moment, Michael was caught off guard, a strange pressure gripping his heart. Thank you, Dad, the boy exclaimed, his voice ringing like a bell through the valley. That evening, Michael found himself in the kitchen, where Amelia was expertly slicing vegetables with the precision of a sculptor chiseling marble. Her hands moved rhythmically, each stroke deliberate, as if she had never truly left the stage she once danced on. She looked up as he entered, a knowing glint in her eyes, as though she had anticipated this visit long before the sun had set. You know why I'm here, Michael said, crossing his arms, his voice low, steady, like the distant roll of a drum in an empty theater. Amelia wiped her hands on a cloth stained with traces of oil and turned to face him, her calm demeanor that of someone accustomed to weathering tempests. I told you already, sir, she said, her voice light but firm, rooted deep like the strongest of trees. I suspect you don't believe he's ready. Michael exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against the counter, playing an unspoken melody of tension. If he does this, he will face failure. Rejection. He may not be able to handle it. Amelia studied him for a moment, her eyes burning like a small flame in the darkness. Or perhaps you're the one who isn't ready for him to fail, she said, her words like an arrow wrapped in silk, soft but piercing straight through his pride. Michael clenched his jaw but did not refute her. Instead, he said, if we do this, we do it right. I want you to train him properly, no coddling, no hand-holding. He needs to be pushed. A slow, knowing smile played at Amelia's lips, crescent-shaped like the sliver of a moon. I never intended to go easy on him, sir. The next morning, training began in earnest, and Michael stood at the edge of the room, his sharp gaze locked onto every movement. Amelia, once a gentle presence in the kitchen with a white apron, transformed into a strict instructor, her voice commanding like the sharp tap of a conductor's baton against a podium. Johnson repeated each drill with fierce concentration, sweat rolling down his forehead like morning dew slipping off a leaf, his small legs trembling with exertion. Your posture is wrong, Amelia corrected, adjusting his stance with the precision of a sculptor refining a masterpiece. Again. Your rhythm is off. Johnson wiped his forehead, took a deep breath, and started over, his eyes gleaming with a stubbornness Michael had never seen before. From a quiet boy who often trailed behind others, Johnson now moved with a newfound force, like a strong wind sweeping across dry fields, refusing to be subdued despite the aching in his limbs. Hours passed, the room filled with heavy breaths and the rhythmic pounding of feet against the wooden floor. When practice finally ended, Johnson collapsed onto the floor, his chest rising and falling like waves after a storm. Amelia handed him a bottle of water, and he took it with the gratitude of a stray pup receiving a gentle pat. You did well today, she said, her tone simple but warm, like sunlight filtering through the trees. Johnson grinned, his smile radiant, burning bright like the embers in a hearth. That means a lot coming from you, he said, his voice as clear as a mountain stream flowing over smooth stones. Michael stood quietly in the doorway, observing their exchange with an unfamiliar sensation stirring within him, not jealousy as before, but something deeper, like an underground river carving its way through stone. As the competition drew nearer, the pace of training intensified, like the crescendo of a song building toward its climax. Johnson threw himself into every session with burning resolve, his small hands shaking from exhaustion, but his eyes never wavering. The initial joy and excitement had transformed into something far more enduring, a steady flame, glowing beneath layers of perseverance. Michael, once hesitant, now found himself drawn into every session, silently tracking his son's progress, feeling a quiet pride he dared not acknowledge. He stood there, bathed in the soft glow of the evening light, watching Johnson repeat each move under Amelia's unyielding instruction. And for the first time, he realized a simple but painful truth: while he had been busy building an empire for his son, the boy had already begun to forge his own wings, ready to take flight. On an evening after an especially grueling practice session, Johnson sat silently at the dining table, his chopsticks barely moving, the plate of food before him untouched like a dull still-life painting. Michael, with eyes as sharp as an eagle's, immediately noticed the way his son's small feet bounced under the table, like the rhythm of an unspoken anxious melody. The tension in the boy radiated from him like steam from a boiling teapot, and Michael, though always in control of everything, felt his heart soften like butter melting under the sun. "What's on your mind, Johnson?" he asked, his voice gentler than usual, like a breeze whispering through ancient trees. Johnson hesitated, his lips pressed tight like a locked door, before mustering the courage to speak. "There's another dancer in the competition. His name is Santiago Beltran. He's won 2 years in a row." Michael nodded slowly, his hands resting lightly on the table like a king listening to a plea from his subjects. Johnson bit his lip, his voice shrinking to a whisper. "He messaged me, saying I don't stand a chance." Michael's fingers tightened around the glass in his hand as if he wanted to crush the arrogance of the distant rival. "And what do you think?" he asked, locking eyes with his son, searching for a flicker of light in the fog of doubt. Johnson hesitated, his slender shoulders trembling like branches before a strong wind, before admitting, "I don't know." Michael leaned in slightly, just a little closer, like a father reaching out to pull his son away from the edge of a cliff. "Listen to me, Johnson," he said, his voice steady and warm like a fire in the winter night. "People only try to tear you down when they see you as a threat. If Santiago took the time to message you, it's because he's shaking in his own dance shoes." Johnson's eyes widened, glowing like 2 freshly lit stars in the night sky, and his posture straightened, like a sapling rediscovering the sun after a storm. "You really think so?" he asked, his voice tinged with newfound hope. Michael nodded, a faint smile flickering like a crescent moon. "I know so. Now go and prove him wrong." For the first time that evening, Johnson smiled, a small smile, but genuine, like dew glistening on a leaf at dawn. Michael sighed, gazing at his son with quiet admiration. The boy who once hid behind thick books and ghost-like habits in their home was transforming, becoming stronger, brighter, like a caterpillar breaking free from its cocoon. And for the first time, Michael felt a deep sense of anticipation, like a traveler yearning for the first light of dawn after a long, dark night, eager to see just how far his son would fly. The competition day arrived, and the theater buzzed like a giant beehive, alive with the energy of warming-up dancers and pounding hearts. Backstage, dancers stretched, repeated steps, murmured words of encouragement to themselves, their hurried breaths blending with the background music into a symphony of nerves. Johnson stood among them, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the worn straps of his dance shoes, his eyes filled with both determination and fear, like a fledgling bird about to take its first flight. Michael watched from a few steps away, his face an unreadable book, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. He had always been a man of control, a general who held every piece on the chessboard of life, but today, his most important piece, his son, was stepping onto the battlefield alone, and he could do nothing but watch, as powerless as the wind unable to hold back a drifting cloud. Amelia appeared beside Johnson, placing a steady hand on his shoulder, like a lighthouse guiding a ship through a storm. "Breathe," she said, her voice simple but steady, like a bell ringing in a quiet valley. Johnson exhaled slowly, nodding, his shoulders relaxing as if shedding an invisible weight. "You've done everything you can," she added, her eyes both gentle and resolute. "Now just dance." From a distance, Michael watched their exchange with a strange emotion swirling inside him. Between Amelia and Johnson, there was a natural bond, an invisible thread that he had never quite managed to weave with his own son. She had given Johnson something more valuable than gold, confidence born from passion, not pressure or expectation. He clenched his jaw, pushing away the bitter feeling of being an outsider in his own home, reminding himself that now was not the time to envy the wind that helped lift his son's kite higher. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, strong as rolling thunder. "Next, please welcome Johnson Michael to the stage." Johnson swallowed hard, his hands trembling like dry leaves in the wind, then turned to look at his father, searching for an anchor, reassurance, approval, or simply a sign that he was not alone. Michael gave a single nod, short, firm, like a rock standing strong against a rushing current. "You've got this," he said, his voice warm and steady as a fire in winter. And in that moment, he was not a commanding father, but simply a man who believed in his son. Johnson stepped onto the stage, the dazzling lights raining down on him like a meteor shower, bathing him in a golden glow. The silence of the audience pressed heavily on his shoulders, like a thick blanket smothering a fragile dream. He stood at the center, his heartbeat drumming against his ribs like war drums before battle. For a split second, doubt slithered into his mind like shadows creeping over the light. What if he failed? What if he forgot his steps? What if Santiago's arrogant prophecy was true? But then, his eyes found them in the front row. His father, Michael, watching him with an intensity he had never seen before, not a trace of judgment or pressure in his gaze, only unwavering steadiness, like an ancient tree standing through countless storms. Beside him, Amelia gave a small nod, a subtle gesture, but enough to ignite a fire in his heart. Johnson took a deep breath, like a traveler inhaling the wind before a long journey. The stage lights faded from his awareness, and as the music began, he started to dance, not to prove anything to Santiago, but to find himself again, under the gaze of a father learning to let go and a mentor who had taught him how to fly. Music filled the air, a melody rippling like a stream flowing through rocky crevices. Johnson let his body relax, surrendering himself to the rhythm like a leaf drifting on the water's surface. His first step was as precise as a jeweler's cut, his second, smoother, flowing like a swallow gliding through the vast blue sky. The rhythm took hold of him, seeping into every fiber, every breath, guiding him through each movement like an old, trusted friend. The vast stage was no longer an intimidating arena but his own kingdom, where pressure melted away like mist under the morning sun, where he danced not to win but to live, to breathe, to be himself. Then came the final moment, a spin and a leap, the challenge he had wrestled with for weeks. Johnson gathered all his strength into his lean legs, pushing off the floor like a bird breaking free from its cage. In that fleeting moment, time seemed to pause, space blurred, and he hovered in the air like a lost star. Then he landed, light and steady, like a droplet returning to the still surface of a lake. The music ceased. A second of silence blanketed the theater like a velvet curtain, then applause erupted, crashing like waves against the shore. Johnson stood there, his chest rising and falling like a sail caught in the wind, his sweat-dappled skin gleaming like gold under the stage lights. His eyes swept across the crowd, searching for his father among the sea of unfamiliar faces. Michael rose to his feet, clapping firmly, his face alight with a quiet yet fierce pride, like embers smoldering beneath ashes. Beside him, Amelia stood as well, her eyes gleaming like two precious gems, carrying the pride of a mentor witnessing her student surpass himself. The results were announced moments later, the host's voice ringing like thunder. And the winner of this year's competition is Santiago Beltran. The audience roared, applause surging for the young man who stepped forward, his unwavering smile that of a young king on his throne. Johnson swallowed hard, keeping his face as calm as an undisturbed lake, though inside him, a faint disappointment crept in like a cold wind through autumn leaves. He had lost. But before he could sink into that feeling, the host's voice rang out again, pulling him back to the present. We would also like to present a special award for artistic expression, an award that honors not only technique but passion, connection, and the heart poured into every step. This award goes to Johnson Michael. The crowd erupted once more, applause crashing down like a summer downpour. Johnson blinked, momentarily lost, like a traveler stumbling upon light after being lost in darkness. His name echoed throughout the theater, yanking him out of his daze. He stepped forward, his legs still trembling from the adrenaline, and received the gleaming medal placed around his neck. It wasn't the tallest trophy, not the dazzling glory Santiago held, but as he turned toward the audience, his father's gaze, Michael's, shone with silent recognition, like a lighthouse guiding him through the night. And that was all he needed. Later, in the cramped dressing room, Johnson sat removing his worn-out dance shoes, his hands still trembling from the lingering energy of the stage. Santiago approached, moving with the ease of someone who had just conquered the world, twirling his trophy in his hands like an expensive toy. "Not bad," he remarked, his tone both arrogant and unexpectedly respectful, like a predator acknowledging a worthy opponent. "You might actually be a real threat next year." Johnson looked up, offering a small smile, humble but carrying a quiet challenge, like a spark flashing in the dark. "Next year, I'll beat you." His voice was steady as granite. Santiago smirked, his smile a mix of amusement and intrigue. "We'll see," he said before turning and walking away, leaving Johnson with a newfound determination taking root within him. Outside the theater, beneath the starlit sky, Michael and Amelia waited, their shadows stretching long across the pavement like two steadfast trees. When Johnson emerged, sweat still dampening his hair, Michael placed a firm yet warm hand on his shoulder, heavy like a winter blanket, comforting in its weight. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice deep, like waves crashing against the shore, searching for something beyond words. Johnson paused, his eyes drifting down to the gleaming medal in his hands, then lifting to meet his father's gaze with a soft but certain smile. "Proud," he said, his voice quiet yet unwavering, like a single drop of water rippling across a still lake. Michael nodded, a quiet joy spreading through his chest like a warm spring breeze. As they walked toward the car, the streetlights cast flickering shadows on Johnson's face, and Michael saw his son in a new light. The boy who had once been timid, a silent ghost in a grand house, now carried a newfound strength, like a small mountain standing firm against the storm. For the first time in years, Michael didn't just feel proud. He felt something deeper, something like a river flowing beneath dry earth. He had spent his life building perfection, controlling every detail within reach. But now, he realized, it was never about winning. It was about the journey. Johnson's journey to finding himself, and his own journey in learning to let go. Johnson looked up, eyes bright as twin stars. "Can I keep training, Dad?" Michael smiled, a rare, genuine smile, like sunlight piercing through dense leaves. "Of course, son. We're just getting started." He turned away, hiding the glimmer of emotion in his eyes. He had never imagined that a single moment, a dance, an award, a smile, could shake the flawless world he had built. But now, nothing would ever be the same. Johnson had found his stage. And for the first time, Michael learned to stand in the wings, watching his son soar on his own wings. If you were him, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more incredible journeys ahead.